a 2015 interview between Kendrick Lamar and Quincy Jones. And Quincy Jones says the last two things to leave this planet will be water and music. I was just like watching this and I heard that and it just immediately clicked with me. Like, it's been called a universal language for a reason. I liked that concept of kind of always having that at the center, even of like conversations about the business side.
In this episode, I talked to Cherie Hu. Cherie is an entrepreneur, journalist, writer, and she writes about the intersection between music and technology. So she has this popular newsletter and community called Water and Music, and we have a lot of fun talking about how she grew the newsletter, her journey from piano performance through to math, and then into journalism. We spend a lot of time in this episode actually on some trends in the industry, not just crypto and things like that, but also Spotify and podcasts and how the world of music and podcasts and newsletters is all intertwined. It's a fun episode. There's a little less in like hard hitting tactics of like do this next with your newsletter, and a lot more on this is what's going on in the industry and what you should pay attention to. So those are some of my favorite episodes, and this one is pretty great. So let's dive in. Cherie, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
All right, so I want to start with your love for music and the music industry. Where did that come from? You have you went to Juilliard for piano performance. Like, tell me more about it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that it's like almost feels like a past life at this point. So I guess to be like more specific about that, I did the Juilliard pre-college program. So it's a like yeah, it's like a kind of weekend program at the conservatory. I did that throughout high school where I would like go to Juilliard, like to the city on Saturdays, do private lessons, have classes in like music theory, chamber music, etc. Yeah, and that was my path for a while, to just go to conservatory for piano and like study that and be like full-time performing pianist ideally. Very very different from what I do now, but still very near and dear to me. A lot of like my closest friends I kind of made in that environment, very intense but fun environment. So I guess my first and most intense involvement growing up with music was definitely on the performing and on the creative side. At the same time, academically, I was really into math, and like I was on the math team, did math competitions in school, and I ended up majoring in stats in college, like taking a lot of math and stats classes, but at the same time, a lot of music classes, and from a very early stage, trying to think about where those two worlds intersected. So because I was, I guess, more like a performer initially, I was thinking about like applying math to music theory. I think that's still a really interesting like application area. And I didn't even, so I guess also in spite of learning, like studying piano for like 10 to 15 years, I wasn't even aware of just the scope of what the music industry involved in terms of like the jobs that were possible, the new kinds of jobs that were emerging until I would say 2013, 2014. That's when I had the opportunity just, to explore this career path to do a 2 week, like 2 to 3 week shadowing experience at Interscope. And it was with their A&R team. In terms of like actual like tasks, I didn't do that much because it was a short amount of time, but just that experience opened my mind even to things like or questions like what is A&R? Like I didn't really know what that was before like really being in the middle of it. And also at that time, streaming had been around for a while, but I think that period of time was really when like Spotify had just launched in the US and was really starting to pick up. Apple Music would launch, just a year or two later. So the whole conversation around like who the main players were in streaming was also changing pretty drastically at that time. So timing also plays a huge role in, I guess, my journey to where I got to now. So kind of through that, I realized I was interested in maybe applying like my academic interests on the stats side to more of a data analyst or like data facing role in the music industry, whether that's at a label, streaming service, music startup, etc. So did a handful of internships kind of in that world, did some academic research on like the music business from a tech perspective, so especially looking at music startups. And then super randomly at a career fair that my friend dragged me to, I very serendipitously ran into my first freelance gig. I happened to meet an editor at Forbes there. His name is Zach Greenberg. He runs the entertainment coverage at Forbes, and he just happened to be looking for more music and tech contributors and like columnists for their entertainment section. Writing, so in this whole journey, writing was never like in the plan. I liked writing on the side for fun. I like had a blog that I would, like update for free occasionally, but I knew nothing about, freelance writing, freelance journalism, let alone, newsletters, that whole world. But yeah, like very fortunately, I think just my interests and my experience aligned really well with this random but really great opportunity to write about music and tech for Forbes. So yeah, that was my junior year in college. Very fortunately, that was kind of my way of diving headfirst into this world of writing. But very quickly I realized that writing is probably like personally my favorite, and I also think generally a really powerful outlet for especially unpacking a lot of really complicated issues in music and tech. Like I was noticing at the time, in terms of like deeper analysis about what was happening in the music and tech worlds, it was mostly just kind of like one-off news bites and headlines, not so much kind of deeper breakdowns of like the trends that were happening. So I decided to make that kind of my beat, like more like deeper analysis of everything under the music and tech umbrella. So that could either be the biggest tech companies like Spotify or Apple, or the latest emerging startups. And yeah, so I've just like fell in love with the writing process, and I've stuck with it ever since. And yeah, I can talk more if that's of interest of kind of how I shifted from that to what I do now, which is less freelancing and now like running my own newsletter full time.
Yeah, well, I think that's great. I didn't expect stats to be in there, like in the music to writing transition. Like I knew about, I guess, the beginning and the end of that arc. I didn't realize that math and stats and all that was in the middle. Is there an element of that still, I don't know, that you still use, or is that sort of like that was a phase of life or phase of college that you've entirely moved on from?
Yeah, I think in a more abstract way, there definitely are things that I've like learned, or just like a more like quantitative mindset. Definitely learning not to take like a given piece of data at face value. Even like very simple things like understanding like correlations, expected values, like in the context of like understanding anything from like streaming to ticketing data. It can be super valuable. I usually don't do kind of more like in-depth, like hard coding, like data journalism. I've done a handful of those kinds of projects early on the side. I would say, most of what I do is, I guess, like more like holistic, like business reporting, or like business analysis. But definitely just the mindset and the training to, especially for like a theoretical math proof. Like you might not necessarily connect that to the experience of writing an article, but just like the training that experience gives you to like really have a sharp lens for like any loopholes in logic, for example. Like this argument like doesn't really make sense, like why are they skipping all of these steps? Or I find like not just in music but in a lot of like business writing, a lot of people will make like just unfounded claims about anything, and people will kind of accept it as truth. So just that training to like really dig deeper into the actual reality of what's happening, quantitatively or qualitatively. I think that's really helped me.
Right.
Yeah,
that makes sense. I mean, all of those things end up serving people so much. Like we have a team member who runs all of our, he's an engineer, his name's Mark, who working on ConvertKit runs all of our onboarding and like builds out those processes for like the first run experience. You dig into his story and he's like got a degree in psychology, and then he turns to marketing and then programming and all of this. And you're like, oh yeah, I can see how all of those things like affect how you show up at work and why you're so damn good at what you do, but then you like, you don't realize that he did not follow a traditional path of like, like college, computer science, and then now I'm a programmer, it's like this whole arc, and it makes for some really interesting viewpoints on the world, like, how you approach problems and all of that. So I can see that showing up a lot in your writing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, I'm definitely glad that you pick up on that. I think, and this is something that I've definitely seen thrive in the world of newsletters or like niche media generally, like not being afraid to I guess also not only focus on a specific beat, but also look outside of your beat for inspiration. Like I love diving into, and I think the music industry should do more of, for example, studying lessons and takeaways from the media world or from gaming or from film. Like there's so many opportunities for just like cross collaboration, mutual learning, that I think is definitely like under reported or kind of undercovered in the media currently. So yeah, definitely in part, large part because of my upbringing and like really embracing that interdisciplinary nature. So I'm really glad to hear that it's come out in my work.
Yeah. Well, maybe take us through, so you're starting freelance writing, contributing for Forbes. Where does that go from there through to running Water and Music now?
Yeah, so after college, this is around 2017, fall 2017, I was very fortunate, and this is also a piece of advice that I would give to people who are interested in freelancing is whenever possible, try to have a small number of like regular anchor clients or like publications you write for. So was very fortunate not only to have this ongoing Forbes gig, but also Billboard at the time was looking for more tech coverage, so I was able to write a lot of tech articles for them. I had it. I had a column for Music Business Worldwide as well, another trade publication based in the UK, and I did do kind of like one-off pitches for other music and entertainment publications. But I would say those first three were definitely like my anchor
Yeah.
clients, and yeah, fortunately, I was able to sustain myself on that for around 2 years. Like very fortunately, wasn't just like try to just grasp at straws or anything. So yeah, it's pretty regular cadence of like this freelanced, very specific industry facing tech coverage. At the same time, I did have a newsletter that I started on the side. Initially, I used the platform Review, which just got acquired by Twitter this year. And I wasn't planning on monetizing it. It was just a way to aggregate my freelance work elsewhere. And this is actually a point where I was inspired by my reporting on the music industry and talking with especially independent artists, and hearing over and over again the importance of owning the kind of relationship you have with your audience or with your fans, which is harder to do on social media platforms. I guess in my case, as a freelancer, I was getting access to these huge legacy institutional publications, audiences that they built over years if not decades, but of course I didn't own that. The brand, the company owned that. So from an early stage, I did realize the importance of owning, I guess, like my audience, or having at least some kind of direct outlet to my readers, to give them a direct channel to me as well. Even just like having that newsletter, which was like a regular digest of my articles from elsewhere, was a really interesting like channel for sourcing. Like I definitely heard from people in the music industry who I would not have heard from, who I would not have heard from otherwise, whom like PR people would not have, I guess, like served or like pitched to me otherwise. So definitely, grateful for that. But again, was not really thinking about it as a business at the time.
Yeah, and growing that newsletter, were you able to have like the in your byline go when you're writing for Forbes or Billboard? Were you able to have a link off to your newsletter and grow that
So
audience?
I think as of now, it still totally depends on the publication. So with Forbes, you are able to customize your bio. Forbes has a lot of contributors also who do have full-time jobs elsewhere. So
Right.
they're a pretty flexible policy of like sharing links to their company or like their other ventures. With certain other publications, it's not possible, or it's like you have to go through a lot of like hurdles to even like
Right.
customize your bio. Yeah, so it really does depend. With the exception of Forbes, I do think sorry, yeah, with the exception of Forbes, I think it's mostly like smaller publications or like publications with smaller
That would
teams that are
like
actually more lenient with that. But yeah, so I did get a lot of traffic from Forbes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I remember, and I'm trying to think who it is. If it's, I want to say it's Greg Eisenberg, but it might be somebody else entirely because I'm like attributing a random tweet that I read. He was basically
Mm.
talking about, all this time spent as a journalist writing for a particular publication and, like 50 million page views on his articles over 5 years or 10 years or whatever. And then going like, but I didn't have a newsletter. I didn't
Mm.
have a way. And he referenced it. He was like, that is your pension. Like as a journalist, your retirement
Mm.
plan, your whatever else, the thing that you're building is like that audience that you're able to link off to. And so
And I mean, that's kind of how it, like, you weren't full time for any of these any one
Mhm.
publication,
Mhm.
but each thing that you wrote, you got paid for the article, and then you were also able to get a little bit more of an audience, which
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, for
sounds like
sure.
what allowed you to go out on your own.
Yes, yes, definitely. Yeah. And so yeah, for the few publications, exactly like Forbes, that where I was able to kind of customize and push the newsletter. Or I guess so also I guess yeah, another tipping point in terms of the transition to now running my own newsletter, was starting to treat this newsletter not just as like an aggregation of other articles, but as a source of original analysis for me. So I
Right.
would say like yeah, like also around 2017, I started treating the newsletter more seriously as a place where you could I guess yeah, as an original, primary source for a lot of especially my more like futuristic or like weird ideas about music and tech that might not otherwise necessarily fit neatly within these other publications I was writing for. I definitely treated it as a sandbox, in that sense. And I actually saw a lot more growth, um, than previously once I started making that shift to like
Right.
taking like spent like I guess dedicating time to yeah, treating the newsletter as the source of original analysis. And so I kind of yeah, did that for around like a year and a half, and it grew to a point where there was an established I wouldn't say community, but definitely like audience and readership at that time of people who were interested enough in music and tech to like opt in to stay subscribed to these kinds of ideas. I was like, oh, maybe there is something here. Maybe I can try. Yeah, I'd like interviewed a lot of artists who had to use Patreon and succeeded with it. And I hadn't actually seen a lot of other writers take advantage of the platform. So I was like, oh, maybe there's a yeah place for like this is a community that I would want also as someone who's really interested in and like passionate about these topics. So February 2019 was a month that I decided to launch the Patreon page. From there, it still did take a good part of a year with that, and also like I didn't want to like get rid of all my freelance income overnight. I didn't think that was a
Yeah.
sound business decision. So I still like yeah kept that up for a good part of a year. And then the timing is surreal and like a bit strange to think about because it was like February 2020, so like right before the pandemic, changed the whole world and just uprooted everything. When I was actually able to make the switch to work on my newsletter full time, or like make the equivalent of a full time income from
Nice.
Patreon income. Yeah, which it's yeah super fortunate to be in that position, and yeah, it's grown thankfully a lot in the last year. I think as people, especially in the music industry, have woken up to the importance of not just tech generally, but also being willing to experiment because there was like no stand in the pandemic. There's like no standard, no rule for like
Right.
like what would or would not work because like everyone was just like the live music industry was obliterated. A lot of artists just like lost the vast majority of their income, um, and I think a lot of people in that environment, yeah, we're much more open to new kinds of solutions, especially in tech for just connecting with fans online, let alone earning an income. So yeah, very grateful to have been in that position to like help guide people through this chaos. And yeah, so I guess like fast forward a year later, I just brought on two part-time people to help. So now I'm thinking about hiring. That's a whole
Mhm.
other question and learning curve that you of course have gone through as well. That yeah, like kind of how to grow from just being like a solo newsletter operator to building a wider brand where multiple people can contribute, still figuring that out in real time. But yeah, so that's kind of the next phase of Water Music this year.
I like it. That's fun. Really quick, will you share the name Water and Music, where that comes from?
Oh yes, of course. So yeah, initially, on the surface, not related to like business at all. So maybe not the best name, but I like it. It comes from a 2015 interview between Kendrick Lamar and Quincy Jones. Um, it was on Hypebeast. I think the interview clip is still available on YouTube. And at the very end, Quincy Jones says the last two things to leave this planet will be water and music. And I was just like killing time on the internet, like watching. I liked both of those. I liked both of them as artists, as people, and I just was watching this and I heard that and it just immediately clicked with me. Like personally, that's how I connect to music in terms of like the value it has in my life. And the role it plays in my life. In hindsight, there are also, if you like really want to dig deep, there are a lot of like similar or parallel words or like similar vocabulary with water and music, like waves and flow. I've been like trying to make a list of those like puns related to water and music. So yeah, it on many layers there are a lot of similarities between the two. Yeah, and I liked that concept of, you know, always like centering music.
Yeah.
As just something that so many people love around the world. It's been called a universal language for a reason. Kind of always having that at the center, even of like conversations about the business side.
Yeah, I like it. Do you get people who get the reference right away, or like
No, vast majority do not. I also
Explain.
think Quincy has only said this in 2 interviews that I've seen. So, which is
You're like, I can
probably a
point to
good
the
thing.
exact
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
reach out, get his team, be like, hey, can you get him to say this a little bit more?
Yeah.
Because every time he says it, it'll give us a little brand boost.
There we go. Yeah.
Um, okay, so I'd love to throw some numbers in there. So if we go back to, I guess it'd be when you launched the Patreon, like how many subscribers did you have, and then on the free side of the email list, and then like what revenue did you get over the next like 30 days or so?
Oh gosh, so the first 30 days was not that much at all. And I guess also for more context, so the Patreon page in terms of how I've communicated um its value to people has also changed pretty significantly between like 2019 and also 2020 through now. So when I started in 2019, I was still mostly a freelancer. People subscribed to my newsletter because they wanted to connect to me, the individual, not so much like water and music as a brand.
Right.
And so I launched a Patreon page the same way that I think a lot of other artists or like writers, creators do on Patreon, which was as a more altruistic way for people to support my work if they wanted to, and then as part of that, they would get access to, you know, this more exclusive community. You know, there's a Discord server integrated with the Patreon membership, as a lot of, you know, other creators do on that platform. But yeah, but the framing was, you know, if you're able to, we'd be really grateful if you could support my work. I'll like maybe write some exclusive like articles, share some exclusive thoughts for members only, and you could be part of this community. And so within 30 days, so the free tier at the time was not more. It was around like 5,000, like 4,000, 5,000. So like not decent, but not but still pretty small. Within the first 30 days, it was not that much at all, because I don't think I like marketed it well, because I guess that wasn't my goal necessarily. It was just like, you know, here's a channel that's available if you do want to and are able to support. So it must have been definitely on sub 100 people in the first 30 days. So as far as conversion rates go, not very good. But yeah, again, like at the time, I hadn't really like settled on you know, water music as a standalone brand. I think it was just kind of like testing the waters. By the end of year 1, and I also published a free recap of kind of my first year on Patreon on LinkedIn, which I think if you search for that on LinkedIn with my name, you should be able to find it. But by end of year 1, I think I had 250 paying subscribers, or I guess paying members is a term that.
And the price point there started at $3, and like what were the different price points at the time? Because now it's like $3, $10, and $15, right?
So it's $3, which is the base price, just gave you base community access. $7, which is still like definitely the most popular tier today, gives you access to like exclusive articles, and also like now I do a lot of like research and gathering a lot of data, so access to kind of like research products underwater music. This process has been a bit delayed because of the pandemic, but I'm also writing a book on the side about the concept of artists as entrepreneurs. And so there's a $15 tier, $15 a month tier that also gives you access to, I guess book research or like drafting updates. I kind of think of that as a kind of book advance on the side that's like crowdsourced. And then at the time, I did have a tier, which I actually don't have anymore, and I can like talk through my thinking about that. I had a $200 a month tier that was basically a way to fund like hourly consultations is how I thought about it. Through Patreon. Yeah. So people who join that tier could have an hour-long call with me every month if they wanted to, and just talk about it was a lot of like startup founders, also people in the music industry who just wanted to just like get more of my thoughts directly one-on-one on a specific music and tech trend. So yeah, I did keep that tier on for a good part of a year as water music, and like the value I think of why people subscribe to the Patreon page has shifted from like a more altruistic and like very individual focused like source of value, like I'm subscribing and I'm paying for access to like Cherie specifically, to more like and so I think this is like maybe not the most like positive term, but I think it is like the right way to think about it, like self-serving on the part of the reader. Like people are now paying for water music membership because they want to get smarter about music and tech, and they want to like learn more insights on music and tech. It's more for their own growth as opposed to like more altruistic. I guess the term I used in my recap is utilitarian. Like it's a utilitarian, community driven, but still utilitarian kind of, reason to pay. As that shift happened, having like a direct consultation tier that was very much tied to me didn't really make sense. There was some kind of like clash with kind of the branding and the ethos there of water music. So I don't have that anymore, but now I do have in place of that a lot of higher tiers for group subscriptions and group memberships. So there are a handful of companies in the music and tech worlds that have come on for like discounted group memberships, which is really great to have more people on board. Also definitely easier to handle from like an accounting perspective. So but yeah, so now like this, it's like now the tiers are from $3 a month, which is still the lowest one, to like $120 a month, but those are for larger groups of people.
Yeah, I like it. And so then, like, how many subscribers do you have on the newsletter now?
So I guess as of recording this, I haven't published the like free tier in a while. I'm definitely focused on like really honing the paid member experience. Yeah, so there are around 1,600 paying members on through the Patreon membership right now. Vast majority of them are also in the Discord server, but not all of them. And yeah, they're all, I think that also represents the kind of paid newsletter size as well. The free tier right now, as of like the last time that I sent out an email, it went out to 12,000 people. And so I am going to revamp it and relaunch it this year. But yeah, I think the paid tier is probably the most accurate or reliable kind of signal of how big the community is, just based on where most of my activity is right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we had done, like, you and I met from when ConvertKit acquired FanBridge, and then I came to, and we did a live Q&A on the Discord server, which was really fun because there's just a ton of people really engaged. And I think when it comes to newsletters and all that, people pay attention to like the total count, and they're like, 2,000 is bigger than 1,000, and we like count up from there, but we don't ever think about, like, let's say you were doing a piano performance in front of 1,600 people, like that fills a really good size. And so people are like, oh, that, like, I only have 1,000 people on my list, or even if someone says like I only have 10,000 people on my list, I'm like, that's like a third of a football stadium.
That's good. It's a really good number. Yeah.
That's a lot of people. So I love that you have the smaller paid group that you're especially investing in. One thing that I'm curious about is why you chose that model instead of, say, another model of monetization, say like courses or books, or like one-time sale products, or even like sponsorships. Or did you explore other models before settling on membership?
Interesting question. I think at the time I settled on membership just because that I think was the best model for, also, I guess in the immediate context of launching the Patreon page for people who wanted to support a writer or creator directly. I think having that like more regular, I was also thinking about, as opposed to how freelance writing normally works and how writers normally get checks, like having a more much more regular, predictable source of income. I definitely like that about just the subscription/membership model in general. That's why I went with that. I have seen, and again, this is not like a music specific issue, but a lot of the biggest like trade publications, there are probably certain things that they can or cannot write about because of who their biggest advertisers are. I think it's definitely, common knowledge, and it's like a tricky situation, especially with like trade publications, I think, across business. And I just didn't want to get into that like situation, into that conflict of interest. So I decided to, like just keep everything like ad free for as long as I can. The one area where I probably would want to bring in a sponsor in the future is for in-person events. I think it makes a ton of sense to have a sponsor either like host it at their office or like pay for drinks, food, catering, etc. So I think, that totally makes sense. So I probably will look more into that in the future. But as of right now, I was just looking for kind of the simplest, easiest to understand, easiest to handle, like regular, predictable source of revenue, and the monthly subscription/membership model made the most sense to me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, as you've been writing about tech and music and the intersection of those worlds, what are some of the most interesting things that you think are happening right now where you're just like, it's the sort of thing that you're out at drinks or happy hour with your friends and they're like, okay, you talked about this a lot. And you're like, no, but let me tell you more about it.
This actually, as of recording this, I went to my first industry like dinner/drinks event in literally a year and a half yesterday in New York. And it was very like jarring to like be in that environment, but by far, and no surprise, like the most popular topic of the night was crypto, and like the whole hype around NFTs, like where are music NFTs gonna go? Are they useless? Like what is actually their purpose in the first place? So the world of music NFTs and crypto is particularly interesting to me right now because the music industry has been through this wave of hype before. I remember the very first industry conference I went to, personally, was also the first time I even learned about what blockchain was. This was back in 2015, even earlier stages. And it was a blockchain one-on-one panel, and it ended up being a shouting match essentially between this like representative from like very old school music industry, like from a performing rights organization, didn't want to share any data, very skeptical about blockchain, and a startup founder who was essentially trying to disrupt that person's company. And that like really set the tone in like in a maybe net negative way for just how the music industry responded to blockchain, how they saw it as a threat. Unfortunately, this is a pattern throughout the history of music, especially if you look back at piracy, like seeing new tech as a threat as opposed to adapting more to it and trying to add value to it and then benefiting from it as a result. The music industry has historically struggled with that. What I like about the kind of more recent wave of hype, even though of course there's like tons of money being thrown around for who knows why around these digital collectible meme, you name it, these NFTs, is that there's like less focus on how do we get these very large corporations, a lot of bureaucracy, to agree to share their data for this blockchain application to we don't need them, we'll just start making money ourselves and like create entirely new kinds of markets and economies around art, music, creativity, etc. I personally am like much more excited by that, and I do think the like bigger music companies are seeing that and being like, it's probably not a good idea now to like stop this activity, but we do have to think about where our role, like what our role is in this ecosystem and how we can add value to that. So that's definitely like top of mind for me currently. Something that will be really interesting to watch, especially in the next couple of months, is how what role, if at all, technology will play in the return to in-person live shows. Probably another one of the big like music tech trends or shifts in the last year was the rise of live streaming. And just the fact that Twitch, for example, now has a dedicated music team that's really fleshed out and a whole separate music category on their page that I don't even know if that would have been feasible were it not for just the circumstances of the pandemic, where a lot of artists were just not just performing shows online but also engaging with fans online through live streaming. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see one, like, yeah, whether whether the concept of a live stream concert will still be sustainable as like a standalone business model. There have been so many like startups founded that in my opinion essentially all offer the same service. I could be wrong, but basically all just allow base ticketing, base like Twitch style interactive live chat for a like I guess for a performance that you watch through a screen. I think a lot of people would agree that is not as compelling as being in a venue in person, being surrounded, shoulder to shoulder by all these people who are all super passionate and excited to see this artist perform on stage. I personally am like much more excited about the latter. That said, I do understand the importance of accessibility and like making concerts more available, especially to people where it just might not be feasible for artists to tour there. So that's like one thing I'll be watching out for is how just this unprecedented investment in live streaming over the last year, how if at all that will carry over to in-person touring, which a lot of artists, promoters, venues, etc. are like preparing for right now, especially as cities are reopening. Hopefully all that investment will not have been for nothing, but we'll see.
Well, yeah, and that's what we're seeing just on the ConvertKit side, pushing into music, and like we were one of those companies that made some pivots related to the pandemic, where like we took our entire events budget, and since events were no more, and we started running what we called ConvertKit creator sessions, of like booking these artists to do highly produced at home performances and like storytelling and all of that. And like none of that would have happened if it wasn't for the pandemic, because the artists wouldn't have had the time to do it. They wouldn't have been like, sure, I'll be hired for this. They're like, no, I have like thousands of people in a in a concert hall that I need to go perform for.
Yeah.
So a lot of that changes, but then yeah, I'm curious what will stick around. It's sort of like the Clubhouse.
Yes.
Where,
Yeah.
it rises like crazy because everyone's like, I have nothing to do. Like, it's 10 p.m. The kids are in bed. I've watched everything there is on Netflix. Who's having an interesting conversation about the future of the music industry on
it's Elon
Clubhouse?
Musk.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
whatever. Like, I'm in. From 10 p.m. to 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Like, sure. And then now, like, if you would tune into some of those sessions, there's nobody in them, right? Because we're all at happy hours. We're like playing outside. We're doing any of that, and so it makes me curious. What of these things? There's so much that changed over the last 14 months, and what's going to stick around, and what's going to revert. Do you have any take on which things you put in each category?
So yeah, I was just thinking about it this week because Spotify just like launched their own Clubhouse competitor.
Yep.
I guess they'd acquired Locker Room / Betty Labs, which was kind of they were developing a niche version of Clubhouse, more focused on sports. Yeah, Spotify bought them, relaunched it as Spotify Green Room this week. And I think so. Okay, one really interesting shift that I have seen Clubhouse make that I don't think will make it easier for them in terms of like surviving as a standalone platform is that they seem to be shifting their branding from being an audio-driven social network where you can log on to Clubhouse and meet all these people from all over the world with similar interests who you otherwise would not have met on Twitter or Facebook. Like that was a draw to me early on. From that to like a very like programmed top-down, I think of it as just like a live radio network. So if you think about how they have a whole like actually both Clubhouse and Spotify and probably some other companies in the near future, they have these creator funds. So they're funding these shows that are going to be happening, programs on a regular basis on the app. On Clubhouse also, even just like tiny features like the ability to type in a text chat in real time during a conversation. Clubhouse still doesn't have that. And so it also is it's a very dramatic difference. Like you're either on the Clubhouse stage and you're, like leaning in and you're interacting, or you're completely passive. There's no like in between. And I think a lot of if you look at like Instagram lives or like Twitch sessions, Twitch chats, like a lot of the entertainment or like social communal value is in that kind of middle ground of interaction, like being able to even like react with an emoji, let alone, like type in a text chat or request, like ask a certain question in text form. So and Spotify does have like that kind of text feature, Spotify Green Room. So yeah, so I am like noticing this this shift towards like funding more formal shows, focus on developing IP. I feel like the companies that will succeed the most at that are companies like Spotify that already have that IP. So if you like open the Green Room app, I opened it yesterday when it first launched, and of course at the top of my feed was The Ringer, which Spotify owns. And they were, recording their like NBA podcast with like Bill Simmons was a guest briefly. So, of course, like Spotify now has that whole, I guess, has like completely verticalized podcasting, like every step of podcasting within its own company. So it totally makes sense that they'll use Green Room to kind of promote those shows. I do think so. Twitter Spaces, I think, is like has an interesting different territory. I think they have a vision that's more about holding audio rooms within specific communities. Like I know they're working on building like a Facebook groups competitor, like on their own platform, so you can like host a Twitter Spaces chat only for people who follow a certain topic, like VC. I think that makes a ton of sense. Discord, to their credit, they've had voice chat within like closed communities for several years, and now they also have like a more properly staged like Clubhouse clone feature now. So it's just a matter of like other tech companies catching up. So, but for those to like sum all this up, in those specific models of like I guess social audio as a communal feature, like a way to connect with other people, it's very, very hard to compete, I think, with these bigger social platforms that already own those social graphs. Like try to create a whole new social graph through audio is really difficult. I think Clubhouse like really captured lightning in a bottle like throughout last year and did do that for some people, but now you have all these other incumbent companies coming in. It's just really hard to compete with that. And then for like the like live radio podcast network model, definitely companies that own I guess Spotify is in a unique position because they both own IP and one of the biggest streaming platforms in the world for audio at least. So they'll probably be the leader in that. But Amazon now owns a podcast company. They own Wondery. So it's also like only a matter of time, I think, before other companies, other streaming services come in and compete for that model. So that's kind of like the two areas that I'm seeing like fragmenting right now.
Yeah, it's fascinating the amount of money that is coming to play in the space. Even I think you see examples of this in acquisitions when like Spotify, acquired Joe Rogan's content, acquired his show, or I guess just exclusive rights to his show is all they acquired. But their stock price went up by so much just off of that announcement that it like way more than paid for. So they're like, that was free. And so, from a grassroots perspective, there's not really, I guess there's so much money being thrown around that like I don't know that you can compete with these other platforms because like Spotify is going to say this is our platform, and we're already going to funnel everything that we have in here, and so that's just fascinating to me. Another thing on the Spotify side that I only recently learned, actually from talking to people at Spotify, was in their business model. In hindsight, this makes perfect sense, but in their business model for music, they pay out substantial fees to the artists, all of that, right? There's all kinds of licensing, who owns the masters, who owns that individual recording, who wrote the song. Oh, you like that, the little bit of money for every stream gets parceled out so many different directions and it can be very complicated. And in podcasting, it's very simple. In fact, all these podcasters, like a podcast stream, like someone who's listening to this episode on Spotify right now, is worth just as much to Spotify as like a song stream because they have your attention, they have you paying.
If anything, it's worth more because I guess if you're listening to music, then I'm not sure about like the actual fine print, but if you listen, like they have to pay exactly like 70% of their revenue from music to like rights holders, whereas like podcasting is like a whole separate pool. And
for better or worse, as a podcaster, we're not going like, hey, where's my cut?
Mm,
Because we're like, the expectation is like, you don't get a cut. You
mm.
monetize through sponsorships or through your other thing. And so Spotify's sitting back and be like, yeah, yeah, of course you don't get a cut. No one gets a, when they're over here and like going, hey, we
Yeah.
just discovered a way better business model.
Yeah. I think it's, oh gosh, whole other issue. So I do think in that sense, podcasters are going through an almost like worse version of what independent artists have gone through in terms of their critique of Spotify and
Right.
like lack of leverage, and kind of like lack of this sense of they are also benefiting from the growth and billion-dollar valuations of Spotify as a company. That said, I do think kind of on the flip side, podcasters right now could be a blueprint for artists in the future in terms of like Spotify, for example, and also Apple. They're investing in a lot of like direct to podcaster or direct to podcast monetization models. Like Apple, like they both are working on podcast subscriptions. Apple just launched their podcast like show level subscription model this month, and a lot of people in the music industry have been like, one of their biggest critiques of Spotify from the artist perspective is that it really, there's like few, if any, ways for the artist to be able to connect and communicate with fans. Like that is not
Right.
the purpose of Spotify. The purpose is to just make it convenient to access all these millions of tracks, make it really easy to discover artists, but not really to strengthen and maximize the value of that artist fan connection. And some people have also joked in like the Water Music server, oh, like what's stopping an artist from just releasing their songs as a paid podcast and like maybe making more royalties from that. probably
Oh, I love
probably
that.
they'll run into like if they own all their IP, if they own all their copyrights, they could pull that off. If you don't, of course, like we'll probably run into some kind of licensing issue. But I'm glad those conversations are happening of like just the model of getting paid an average of just a fraction of a penny per stream isn't the only way. Like look at these other creators on the same platform that we rely on every day. They're now able to make an income directly from their listeners and supporters. Like why shouldn't there be that same option for musicians, for artists? So I think that awareness of different models, business models for like on the artist level around streaming, I think are really good. But yeah, to your point, for Spotify, it's podcasts are just an easy way to kind of circumvent licensing. And really, I think they are trying to become the major label equivalent in podcasting, just in how aggressive
Right.
they are about acquiring IP. Just because it doesn't exist, maybe it's harder for them to create these like direct to artist subscription features, for example, in music, because they have these relationships with the existing major labels, and they can't really like tarnish that if they want to keep music on their platform. So definitely
Right.
lots of layers there. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. We'll see a lot more, like the Joe Rogan deal or the Ringer, or those sorts of
Mm-hmm.
things really stood out. But now, like just the other day, they announced the Call Me Daddy podcast
Yep. I think it's
was
60
acquired.
million
Yeah,
is the deal.
when you're
Yeah.
just like, that's amazing. There are
Yeah.
startups that have raised crazy amounts of funding that don't sell for
Yeah.
$60 million.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so that is fascinating to see. Let's bring this conversation to the newsletter side of things, because in the we have a lot of the same dynamics happening, or
Mm-hmm.
like same tensions happening in newsletters between large publications and solo newsletter creators and all of that. And like you're as much in the middle of that world as you are in the music side of it. So
Mm-hmm.
what are you
Mm-hmm.
seeing, and what's your take on it?
Yeah, oh gosh. Yeah, I think about this all the time. I think there are a lot of parallels, yeah, between, I guess, thinking also on the so yeah, sorry to backtrack. So there are multiple like layers you could look at this. A lot of like media companies and music companies face similar challenges with tech and social media platforms, for example, like the relationship between like media companies and Facebook is quite similar to the relationship between like labels and Spotify in terms of that tension of who has more power. This struggle always with like not being able to control the like context in which you
Mhm.
I guess your work is delivered, fed to potential readers or potential like audience members. Um, the fact that Spotify is also even now, creating an advertising product where artists and labels have to pay to reach certain fans. That is literally a copycat of, these existing social advertising platforms. So lots of parallels on that level. On the individual creator, in this case, like artist or writer level, I actually think in some ways writers, the individual writer situation is even worse in the music industry, because so even with like the recent newsletter boom, as a freelance writer for income, I feel like you do immediately rely a lot more on these bylines of bigger publications to like make a name for yourself, let alone earn income. I think just by nature of the like freelance economy, it's really, really hard to build a newsletter from the ground up if you don't already have like access to those like, bigger audiences somehow. I think that is a reality of running a newsletter, especially from scratch. And there is a whole wave now of like freelancers, actually very similar music, like freelance writers trying to unionize or like collectivize around, also asking for better terms in freelance contracts. But like a lot of the times, so not only do you, like a lot of writers rely on these bigger like brand names to earn income, but depending on the publication, you might not, especially if it's a bigger one, you probably don't own your own IP. Like you're spending hours and hours doing these interviews, writing these articles, but the publication ultimately owns them. I think is the Washington Post is like in the middle of a controversy this week as of recording, because they are like making it a lot more difficult for writers to even like talk to like an agent, a talent agent, if they want to like write a book. So like I guess that's more in the case of like full-time staff, but it does translate to freelance contracts, like the right to use this article you published in like a book they might write later on. So lots of parallel issues around like leverage, around like IP ownership. And yes, but so I do think now with newsletters, I am surprised that there aren't more musicians who like are investing heavily in newsletters in a capacity that is not just like marketing. So like if you subscribe
Here's
to
my way to single.
Exactly. Like if you subscribe to, especially more on the label level, like Universal Music Group's like newsletters, it's just pure marketing. There's no sense of it being like personal, not even like deeper copy. It's like mostly just images and links to stream a song on Spotify. Maybe it's because like not all artists are like comfortable with crafting and like writing these more long form like text experiences, which maybe that makes sense. But yeah, so now I do think in terms of like the newsletter economy of I guess I'm thinking of like Substack being the prime example of these like individual standout personalities building their own newsletter brands. Writers are definitely like leading the way in terms of that like direct to fan, or direct to reader, direct to supporter kind of like channels and income than the music industry is right now. But yeah, like historically there have been a lot of parallels in terms of issues that both like creators in both worlds have faced.
It's interesting what you're talking about, because you're absolutely right that not very many artists are taking that personal, like behind the scenes, get to know me sort of approach. A lot of small artists will do that. People who are up and coming and getting established. Think about artists that are on like ConvertKit's platform that have been on for a while. Even like Tim McGraw, like he's been on our platform for quite a bit, and it's still a bit of a push to get them to do more storytelling and less marketing, and to make that distinction, because they're like, oh, here's a single that's coming out. One thing that they have done is like more behind the scenes video and things like that. And so like that's part of the reason we've built into ConvertKit like native video integrations where you can play it directly play the video directly in the email, because like talking just with Tim's team, for an example, they'll be sitting down to film something big, and then they'll be able to get him to film for like 5 minutes talking directly to fans, and that's like, okay, we're already here. We've got a studio set up. Like, yeah, I'll record something for the newsletter.
Yeah.
The example that I love to see more of is like Arnold Schwarzenegger runs a ConvertKit newsletter, and his is so good. It's like all the behind the scenes and the stories and like answering fan questions. And you're like, why? I don't know. What would it take to get Kendrick to do something like that?
Yeah.
Because it would be amazing. Like it
Yeah.
would just be phenomenal. So, but that pivot hasn't happened in music yet.
Yes, I guess you mentioned Kendrick specifically. I think he's a great example of an artist who is so revered and respected and is just like so talented in like everything he does, but is also very private. Like aside
Right.
from album releases, he will like rarely do interviews. Very lucky to even just get a handful. And yeah, so just on social medias, Instagram, YouTube, just very like quiet most of the time. And that works for him. I do think, yeah, it is important for artists and musicians generally to like not let the tech I guess not let tech tell you what to do. Like definitely only invest in
Right.
channels that you're comfortable with, that align with like what you're really good at. Like yeah, especially with I guess like text based storytelling or more personal storytelling, like newsletters are great. But if you're like not ready to do that, that's fine. You don't have to. So yeah, I think it's there's a bigger I guess trend to unpack in music as well of um, this expectation among a lot of fans that artists are almost like their friend. I think this is the like the impact of social media also extends to like influencer culture. Like, oh, I'm following this influencer on Instagram. I saw what she had for breakfast, so clearly I'm in her circle, and like I might as well be his, her, their their friend. Um, and that like requires a lot of openness and vulnerability that maybe I think certainly not all people, let alone not all artists, are comfortable with. But yeah, I would say like the slow steady rise of newsletters, it'll be interesting to see how it like meshes with that trend of just expecting artists to be a lot more vulnerable and open. Live streaming certainly I think like fits into this category as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean the trend will only continue. So, and
Mm-hmm,
then
mm-hmm.
like as as we've established many times over, email is not dead. Newsletters are
Right,
on
yeah, of course.
quite a rise. Um, Maybe bringing it back to to water and music and everything that you're doing. What are you looking to next as far as maybe the next milestones for water and music, and then how you think about growing to get to those? Like, what are the things that you're doing to grow the audience or grow the revenue?
So yeah, next steps. There are a lot of as different moving parts. So I guess earlier I really briefly mentioned events. I think that will
Mhm.
be really important. I guess after the pandemic kind of dies down and conferences come back, for example, as like an individual freelance writer, conferences were by far like one of the most effective, just like marketing, audience building, networking tools for me, especially meeting
Yep.
people. In the music industry specifically whom yeah I would not have met otherwise, kind of through more formal like PR interactions or interviews. So definitely want to invest more in events, especially around those kind of like industry conferences that happen every year. A separate new water and music website is in development. That will definitely be a milestone in
Nice.
terms of being able to have much more control over the reader journey, like the reader experience, making articles. Like I've published I think over 150 like articles slash posts on the Patreon page at this point, but the search functions on Patreon are not the best.
Right.
I'll very open about that. So definitely want to the website will definitely help out with that. So that'll be a big milestone. Definitely like hiring is like something I'm also like figuring out in real time in terms of what's the best like combination of people to bring on. So right now I would say the three pillars of what Water Music does is like editorial, like long form editorial analysis, research, very data heavy research, and then community in terms of our Discord server and our Hangouts. So in terms of like hiring, bring on more people to help like manage all those three different parts that like work together in a really and sorry like work together in a really complementary way.
Yep.
That'll be a big priority for this year as well. Yeah, and I guess like the only other thing that comes to mind, and I haven't like figured out how to like formalize this or structure this, but going back to this notion of interdisciplinary thinking about the future of music and about entertainment, I do think we were just talking about Clubhouse and Spotify Green Room and podcasts. A lot of people might think of that as a podcast story, but it absolutely is a music story as well because it could like Spotify pushed that feature like the new app to artists, and I think the music industry could use those kinds of features in really interesting ways. So that's one example, like music and podcast converging, music and gaming. of course, I think are converging a lot more, especially looking at the last year. So, how to build and expand editorial coverage in a way that reflects that. That would probably be more in the form of like hiring more people who are able to who are not experts, but are like fluent in like multiple areas of entertainment and how they merge together through tech. Very like specific kind of I guess niche view on business, but that's definitely something I want to like take more seriously in the future.
Yeah. Yep. That makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm excited to continue to follow everything you write about the industry and all of that. And for anyone else who wants to do the same, where should they go to follow you online and subscribe to the newsletter?
So definitely the best way to learn about what water music and all the different parts of the membership is just to go straight to our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/water and music, and all spelled out. I'm on Twitter at Cherie Hu, CherieHu, and numbers 42. You can also find the Water Music Twitter handles in my bio also, so you can follow the membership/newsletter there. And yeah, hopefully you can, hopefully those of you who are listening, some of you can join the Patreon page, and you can find me in our Discord server as well.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for joining, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you as well, Nathan.